pretty quickly after we got started, the Penn folks started helping us with organizing our thoughts, so they've become part of this collaboration as well. But I'll just go through a little bit about what we've done. So we took the hypothesis that we have in the preservation and research data management world, which is thinking about authoritative sources, thinking about places where people should be going to receive information, removing duplicative copies of content, and also chain of custody. And we were thinking through a lot of the challenges that have come up with all the different events happening across our system as well as the world. And we thought that we are not the first, just with the latest anxiety, it's not necessarily the first time in our history where we've had this type of anxiety, and we or have had this type of remit given to us as a country or as a world. And there have been past projects that have existed. And so we just started talking through some of those past projects. And the project of data.gov came up, which for those who I'm sure most of you know, it's an Obama administration project that started about 7 years ago to help archive authoritative copies of federal data sets. And we took that as a premise of that is a very important initiative and one that has had its ups and downs in the past 7 years and has definitely not fulfilled its full potential, but one that we really do support the idea of. We took that as the premise that we should be supporting that, and that the full system of data rescue events and this full data at risk energy should really be focusing on helping grow that authoritative corpus or a similar authoritative corpus. And so we spent Max Ogden from the DAT project spent the time to work with Philip Ashdock at data.gov to scrape the metadata that is associated with the files that are archived in the registry at data.gov, and pulled down the metadata, and in the process learned a lot about how the metadata had been structured in the different agencies giving that information at data.gov. The research that we did along that way was kind of the first time anybody had really dug deep into all the variations of the federal data sets that are coming into data.gov, and so that really helped immediately add value to the data.gov project. We pulled down that metadata and started then to, we have archived that, and we are updating that corpus on a regular basis, every 6 hours. And then we also went ahead and started to look through those metadata files and start to grab copies programmatically of all of the data that's being kept or being listed in the registry at data.gov. That came to about 41 terabytes, and UC Riverside donated some space for us to make those files, those backup files, available. And part of the DAT project, if you're not familiar with it, it's Max project, is about data sharing, and it's also about creating unique hashes. So we've programmatically been able to grab the metadata files, grab the data files themselves, create unique hashes, and then Max has created a script to go through and check every 6 hours if anything has changed. And we see this as part of the solution or a model for how things are moving in a couple ways. One is we're utilizing a registry that exists, that has been kind of thought through and has a mandate to be the authoritative registry for federal data. And we are also keeping the chain of custody and the ideas of versioning and monitoring of data sets alive through these monitoring scripts. And so we've had this up and running for about a month or so, and we are updating the corpus of files. But the questions that we have for ourselves, and we've heard from others, is how do you grow the corpus at data.gov? And so we've been talking a lot with Lori and others about how can we start to leverage the work that's happening in these different spaces, or the work that we'll be doing in DC in May, how we can leverage that to feed into a central registry and maybe use this kind of a model that we've come up with as a backup feature for that central registry. We haven't really thought through all of the issues. Another issue that we've heard is a question that comes up is, yes, you have a copy of all the files that are up on a federal data.gov site, but that is a federal data.gov site, and what if that goes down? And there would be a lot of pieces of the puzzle that would have to happen before that would happen, but that is definitely a concern. And so we've been embarking on a second phase of the project, which is to actually do a backup of the front end of data.gov. And that is not intended to be an alternate, a primary way of getting into the data sets. It's really meant to be an alternate way of getting in. And so the only difference, we should have that up and running before May. The only difference between the appearance will be a huge banner that says this is not data.gov, this is a backup, because if you are interested in federal data sets, you should be going to data.gov because that is the authoritative source. And also the other difference is that for each of the registry pages, we will be listing the primary URLs and information files, resource links that exist on the registry at data.gov, as well as links to our backup copies. And we will then have a monitoring script. So if anything changed, or if for some reason the files were removed or access was changed for the federal copies, we would have a little way of monitoring, putting that up on the screen on the web pages for people to see that those existed and that the backup copies are still available. And this is not intended to replace data.gov, but really to answer the questions that we get about, well, if we're investing all this energy into this authoritative source that sits at a federal level, what do we do when even that goes down? We wanted to just showcase that we had a solution for that to hopefully get people past that hurdle. And so that's really it. You know, we've kind of been thinking about this in terms of, again, like at a system level, a little bit detached from the individual events that are happening, thinking about it at a more holistic level of how are we going to support a system-wide or a kind of global network of data rescue or data at-risk events. And it's just one model and one idea. But we are looking forward to presenting more or talking more about this in May. And I don't know if we want to open it for questions or maybe just move on to Erin's presentation.
We ask people who have questions to at least acknowledge something in chat so that we can call on them after Erin's talk. And same thing goes as Erin's talking. If people have some questions they'd like them to answer. I think that was really helpful, John. Thank you. It's a really interesting project, and I would imagine there will be some questions. So I will turn off my mic and turn it over to Erin.
And just real quick, we do have a blog post that we did around this effort, a couple of them, and I put a link to that in the chat as well if people wanted to follow up.
Thanks. I'll go ahead and start. So this is Erin Brenner from the University of Pittsburgh. And I'm very informal today. I do not have a presentation. I'm just talking about some beginnings of work that we're doing here. I should also mention I have two colleagues working with me on this, Mike Bolam and Nora Mattern, who are both on this call. So at Pitt, we began by responding to the call for people interested in serving as pilots for thinking past the individual data rescue events towards sustainability at the individual library level and how we might work on that together. And I should also say that we did have a data rescue event here in Pittsburgh a couple weeks ago that went very well. We were very pleased with it. But one of the things that we struggled with a little bit as organizers, and in our particular event, most of the organization happened from libraries. So it was a very library-centric event. What we struggled with a little bit was feeling like we had a good connection to the data users and the communities of data use. So with that in mind, one of the things that I think we appreciated about this idea of the pilot, and particularly the way that Lori framed it in her blog post, an experiment, is that it asks us to focus on a particular identified community of data users. And when we look for that community at Pitt, we find we actually have two well-defined established data repositories within the University of Pittsburgh. And they are great examples of data repositories already functioning for specific user communities, both of which have either, in one case, an already established pattern of pulling down federal data, in the other case, a strong interest of doing that. So our initial work was really just having conversations with the managers of both of those data repositories to understand the way that they thought of federal data in particular in relation to their work managing a data repository and serving a particular community of users. So I'm going to introduce both of those data repositories and then tell you a little bit about what we learned from the conversations with them. I should also say that I'm not sure that these conversations led to answers as much as maybe to more questions, but I think that that's okay for where we are right now. So the first of these is called Project Tico. I'm going to paste the URL into the chat. Project Tico is oops, I just pasted a New York Times link. Let's try that again. Well, it's Tico, let's see.
Now we know you are interested in Second Life.
Is that what it is?
I don't know. It's not your New York Times.
It's probably about the Met depositing their old slide collection. Sure. Is what it actually is probably about. So Project Tico is a public health data archive, and it focuses on disease. So it's aimed at epidemiologists, and it contains a lot of historical data. And they're very interested in federal data. They've already captured a lot of data from the CDC, so they capture things like mortality and morbidity reports. But they're also interested in things like climate data, so where climate conditions in particular areas that might relate to the spread of disease, and they're interested in population data, so they're pulling down quite a lot of census data as well. One of the first things I observed is like their data interest does not map to any particular agency. They seek data where it will be useful to their community. So naturally, it spreads across a lot of different agencies and sub-agencies. The next point is that they also don't aim to be comprehensive, at least the way that we might think of being comprehensive in the data rescue model, where we would take an agency and kind of methodically move across its web presence or look for data across all of its pages. They're really seeking out data specifically that is useful to their identified community and then doing a selection process. And in fact, part of the value that that this data repository is providing explicitly is selection, filtering, in many cases cleaning, merging. So they're doing all of these activities that we would recognize as data curation activities. But in doing so, they're also modifying or putting the data at a step or two of remove from its original publication by the federal government. So that's interesting. The second repository is the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center. Also pasting this in. Okay, so this is a civic open data portal. They primarily publish open data from our city and county governments, but they're very interested in federal data to Bob, who's the manager of this project. It was really interesting to hear how much his perspective matched the perspective of Project Tico, and that, again, he's interested in lots of federal data, but selecting only that data that's useful to his identified community, which is really people focused on the region. So he described things like we might go to a federal data set where the data set is broken down by, sorry about the audio. I'm in a not as quiet place as I might like to be. They might go to a federal data set where it's an enormous data distribution, but it's broken down by states, and just pull out the Pennsylvania data, for example. And then even within that particular data set, again, make certain selections. One of the ways that they enrich the value is by adding additional documentation where it's poor, or additional metadata, and creating data user guides around federal data. So this idea of like a very active curation processes and transformation of the source federal data to make it more meaningful for their particular communities was a very strong theme with both of these data repository managers. So, taking that into account, our group in the library is reflecting, okay, well, what's the place of the library here? Because we want to support if we want to align our support with the way that these particular local communities are using federal data, then we want to, being completely comprehensive and taking a particular slice or sub-slice of a federal agency or sub-agency isn't meeting their needs. They pick the data from across a wide span of agencies that's meaningful to them. But the thing I think that, the other thing I should say is that we asked them about issues of provenance and like how they would connect back to the original source data sets that they're drawing from. And in both cases, the repository managers said, well, this is important, but really mostly what we do is just include a link back to where we got the data from. So they themselves are not pulling down, the source as some kind of reference copy. They're pulling down what they feel like they need to, doing all of their merging, cleaning, additional description, and then presenting that to their users. So as we reflected on this in the library, we thought, well, one of the points of potential weakness is that original data set that they're referring to. But if we are thinking of this from a stewardship perspective, like how do we ascertain the degree of vulnerability that their reference data sets might face? I mean, and that's really kind of an open question. It seems like one that the community is dealing with. So coming up with some criteria of evaluating how vulnerable a particular data set that these communities are using is of interest to us. But we're also, if we think ahead to a kind of distributed collection of data sets that might be managed through a network of libraries, we're really interested in tools or protocols that would allow us to make an evaluation as we're looking through data sets that these local repositories are using, to get a sense of where else it might be stewarded, and get some kind of measure of commitment or stability of that data. I mean, I think that's a very open question. So really, that's where we left off, and this is just from two really preliminary conversations, but we thought it was really interesting. I think what we want to do is go back and do even more detailed user stories with these two. Yeah, it already helps us get thinking about perhaps pathways that diverge from at least the model that was set up for the individual data rescue events. So I will stop there.
So thank you so much, John and Aaron, who both agreed on absurdly short notice when I asked if they would present about their work. But I hope that you can all see why we wanted to ask for these two perspectives to kind of inform a conversation as we look forward to the May meeting. Because I think from the many conversations that I've had or been part of, that these two perspectives offer a really, really, really great complement to one another as we think as a larger community or constellation of interconnected communities in libraries and open data and government and other kinds of communities. Like what is the scope of the problem, which is a lot of what we want to think about as we move towards the May meeting. I think that the work that the folks at the California Digital Library are doing, and a kind of systematic approach to gathering federal information, like a systematic approach to backing up what is a systematic approach to gathering federal government information, is kind of one really interesting model. And I think John brought up a bunch of questions and points and concerns and places that are what it looks like to be outside of that, and then what can be done inside of that system. And I think Aaron's experience at Pitt, where they're really exploring sort of what does it mean inside an institution where you have a certain set of responsibilities to take those responsibilities seriously within your community. And so I'm really, really just thank you both so much to both of you. We have, I think that in terms of Morris has a question. So let's do a couple minutes of questions for these two, and then we'll move to Kim for a little bit of what's happening with the May meeting.
Okay, cool. So John, just a question for you. As you were talking about sort of data.gov as the authoritative source, totally get that, wanting to point people to that, and then the idea of creating okay, so anyway, right, about the pointing data.gov as an authoritative source, and you mentioned making a clone of the front end in case data.gov goes down. So my question was, and kind of comparing that to print repositories of government information, where we have explicitly created other authoritative repositories that are not the federal government, right? And just wondering your thoughts on and thinking on that compared to digital data, and sort of would we, just create an explicit, this is the alternative repository, official repository of government digital data, as opposed to creating a clone of their front end, or when might we consider doing one or the other, or, that kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, we've been taking, so I think it's important for us as a community to decide what is going to be that secondary, or that secondary source, or another way of framing it would be the primary alternate source of the information, and we should be funneling our efforts to that. One of the challenges that we saw with the data rescue events is that the chain of capture to the data refuge CCAN instance was taking a very long time. The communication channels are still very difficult, and it doesn't allow for a quick lookup of what the status is of different data sets, and it doesn't allow for individual contributors to understand where they fit into the larger picture. And so we don't expect that what we're working on necessarily solves all those problems. Some of those are solved by the data refuge CCAN instance. Some of them are solved through the community and the process optimization that's happening. But I think if we're going to move toward the libraries network approach, we're going to have to answer what you're bringing up, which we're trying to, definitely send some signals with what we're doing. But there needs to be a place where all of the trusted captured copies are archived, and that place, in my opinion, needs to also include those that are being captured by the agencies themselves, so that we have them all laying all together. And we're not creating kind of siloed ghettos of information that then can create a lot of confusion down the road.
Yep, gotcha. Great, thanks.